Today we'll be discussing a very interesting and intricate halachic discussion, and that is, what is the Torah perspective on causing other Jews to sin? The prohibition of, as we'll see, it's lifnei iver lo sitein mechshol. You're not allowed to cause another Jew to stumble. You're not allowed to cause another Jew to commit an avera. And the question is, what are the parameters? How does this affect a lot of the common questions that Rabbanim get asked, inviting guests for Shabbos when they're going to drive, and that whole discussion? We're not going to go through the details of each shiloh, but we're going to sort of cover the background, understanding the prohibition of lifnei iver. And if we know the background, and then when you ask a Rav, you'll be able to understand where the Rav is coming from and how it affects many of the common questions, inviting guests for Shabbos when they're going to drive to your house, giving food to someone who's not religious and they're not going to make a bracha, and all these questions. The only way to understand the psak that you get from a Rav, obviously you have to ask a Rav for everything, and I want to make that clear. Definitely today's discussion should not be meant for normative halacha, but when we ask a Rav, hopefully after today's discussion we'll get a little bit of a better understanding as to where the Rabbanim are coming from. So let's begin. The pasuk says, it's in Vayikra, Parak Yotes, pasuk Yudalid, Lifnei iver lo sitein mechshol. The Torah says, you shall not place a stumbling block before a blind person. The Gemara tells us that this pasuk is the source that one is not allowed to cause another Jew to sin. The Torah says you shall not cause a blind person to stumble. What that means is you're not allowed to cause a Jew to fall. You're not allowed to do something that's detrimental for another Jew. And therefore, causing another Jew to sin is not allowed. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Daf Vav Amud Aleph, gives an example of this. The Gemara says that something you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to give wine to a Nazir. A Nazir was a person who a Nazir is a process that if you become a Nazir, you're not allowed to drink wine, and you're not allowed to contaminate yourself to Beis HaKvaros, and you're not allowed to cut your hair. There's a whole process, not for now. So the halacha is that a Nazir is not allowed to drink wine. So the Gemara says you're not allowed to give wine to a Nazir. That's the problem of neiver, because by doing so you're causing him to sin. Another couple examples that the Mefarshim give, the Gemara also references this. You're not allowed to give a cheeseburger to a Jew. If a Jew says, "Hey, could you buy me a cheeseburger?" you wouldn't be allowed to do that, because that's considered causing him to sin. You're enabling him to sin, and that's not allowed. Similarly, when it comes to selling idols, to sell idolatry to a Jew is also not allowed. Even to a non-Jew may not be allowed. A person has to ask a shaila if he gets involved in the process of selling like crosses and these type of things. You have to ask a Rav, because even non-Jews to some extent are not allowed to do idolatry. You have to know whether Christianity is idolatry for non-Jews. It's definitely idolatry for Jews, but that's a whole discussion in its own right. But the point is, if a Jew asks you to pick him up one of these anything from the church, chalila, you're absolutely not allowed to. Even though you're going to say, what am I doing? It's not my problem. It's another Jew's business. Someone told me once that they were pretty much enabling someone to sin, and they said, I'm God's salesman, not his policeman. It's not true. You're not allowed to cause someone to sin. That's part of the laws. Lifnei iver lo sitein mechshol. That's what the Gemara tells us. The Gemara, though, says a very, very important ruling and condition for the prohibition of lifnei iver. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah Daf Vav Amud Aleph, Amar Rav Nasan. Rav Nasan says, Menayin shelo yoshet adam koishel yayin lenazir ve'ever min hachayla v'nenoach. How do I know that I'm not allowed to pass a cup of wine to a nazir? Tamalomar, the pasuk says, Lifnei iver lo sitein mechshol. Okay, that's what we just said. Then the Gemara says an unbelievable line. When is it a prohibition? When are you not allowed to pass a cup of wine to a nazir? When you and the nazir are on opposite sides of the river. What does this mean? What the Gemara is telling us is the only time that the biblical prohibition of lifnei iver applies is if the person could not do an avera without you. Meaning, you're on one side of the river, You have a nazir on the opposite side of the river, and the nazir says, can you pass over, stretch over with your hand, pass me a cup of wine, and I'll stretch over and I'll take it from you. That's when it's prohibited. Because without you, the nazir can't get the wine. You're the only one who can get it. You're on two opposite sides of the river. You're not just participating in him sinning. You're the only facilitator of it. However, if the nazir can get wine without you, he's just asking you to pass it. Meaning, you're on the same table. You're sitting on a table with the nazir. The wine is next to you. The nazir's like, hey, can you pass me the wine? Now, could the nazir go get it? Of course the nazir can get it. He's just a little lazy right now. So then the prohibition of lifnei iver would not apply. That's what the Gemara tells us. And that's obviously a tremendous, tremendous heter that a lot of people point to. And please, if you're listening to the shir, don't stop now, because we're going to have to see there might be it's still rabbinically prohibited and there are exceptions. But what the Gemara tells us is that the deoraisa, the biblical prohibition of lifnei iver, of causing others to sin, only applies if you're the only facilitator of it. If, however, the guy can sin without you, then it would not be prohibited to pass him wine. So what's an example of this? A lot of Rabbanim, when they discuss inviting guests for Shabbos when they're going to drive to your house, a lot of them point and say that even if, what's the problem? If you invite them, right, you're going to cause them to sin by them driving on Shabbos. They're sinning and you're causing them to sin. Now let me ask you a question. When I invite someone to my house for Shabbos, and again, the point of this discussion is not for this shaila because it's very complicated. I don't want to get into it, but I'm just using this as an example. If I want to invite someone for Shabbos to my house, and then they drive, could they have driven without my invitation? Yes, they could have driven without my invitation. I was not the facilitator. I didn't give them a car. Because they could do the Aveira without me, the prohibition does not apply. That's what the Gemara tells us. That's what Rashi says. Rashi says it's only prohibited to pass wine to a nazir if without you he can't get the wine. But if he can get the wine without you, then it's not prohibited. There's no problem of lifnei iver. Now, before we begin to discuss whether there's a rabbinic prohibition, which there is, but about this ruling of Trei Avri Dinara, that's the poskim called Trei Avri Dinara, meaning that it's only prohibited to pass, to cause someone to sin if they could not have done the sin without you. First of all, there are some exceptions. First of all, if the only other person that they can do the Aveira by is by a Jew, it may be a problem. That's not for right now, but there's a big ruling of Rav Shlomo Kluger. And that is like this. Let's say you have this nazir. Let's pick the nazir, the case of the nazir, because that's the case of the Gemara, and I think it's a more simple case before we get into any details. Again, what did the Gemara tell us? The Gemara told us if there's a cup of wine and me and the nazir are on opposite sides of the river, I'm not allowed to pass him the wine. And if I do, I broke a biblical prohibition of lifnei iver, because without me, he couldn't have any wine. Okay, that makes sense. Now, let's say the wine is on the table, and he just says, hey, can you pass me some wine? Or you're sitting next to a colleague who's not religious, and he has non-kosher food on the table, and he's eating it, and then he says, hey, could you pass me it? So, according to this Gemara, there's no biblical prohibition to pass it to him. That's what the Gemara says. Okay. Now, there's a very important ruling of Rav Shlomo Kluger. And it's also the opinion of the Lev Avram, Rav Avram Weinfeld Zatzal, in Siman Ayin Gimel. And that is, even if he could do the Aveira without you, meaning let's say he could do the sin without me, take me away, he could still get the Aveira done, so then it's not a problem with lifnei iver. That's what the Gemara tells us. But the Pais can point out, if you instigate him to sin, he wasn't going to sin without you, then it might be a problem. Let me explain. You have this case of wine at the table, right? You have a nazir. Let's make it easier. You have someone, there's a cheeseburger on the table, it belongs to this non-religious, non-observant guy, and he says, hey, could you pass me my cheeseburger? So you're, by passing it to him, you're enabling him to sin, but he could do it without you. fine, then it's not prohibited of lifnei iver. But says Rav Shlomo Kluger and says Rav Avram Weinfeld, what if I'm the one who's instigating it? Meaning, let's say there's wine on the table, and there's a nazir here, but the nazir doesn't want to drink the wine, because the nazir, he's not so religious, but he's still a religious person, he doesn't want to drink the wine, and I start saying, come on, drink the wine. The wine's amazing, you got to taste this wine. I'm pushing him. So yes, could he do the affair without me? Yeah, he could get it done if he wanted to, but I'm the one who's pushing him to do it. I'm the one who's instigating it. I'm the one who's bringing the idea of doing an affair at all. Then it's a problem. Even if he could do it without me, if you're the one who's instigating it, then it's a problem of lifnei iver. Then it's a biblical prohibition of lifnei iver. And I think that's a very, very important rule to understand. A lot of people know this Gemara, that if the guy can do the aver without you, it's not lifnei iver. But they don't understand though, but if you push him to do it, then it is lifnei iver. So this might be relevant when it comes to the discussion of inviting guests for Shabbos. I said before that, a lot of Rabbanim say, if I invite a guest for Shabbos to my house on Friday night, or for Shabbos day, I want to invite him for Shabbos day, and he's going to come to my house, he's going to drive. So it's a problem lifnei iver. So a lot of Rabbanim say, but at the end of the day, could he drive without you? Yeah, he could drive without you. So it's not lifnei iver according to the Gemara. That may be true, but you really have to think about it, because if you push someone to sin, then it is a problem of lifnei iver, even if he could do it without you, if you're the instigator. So you have to understand, you have to really think about it. If I have this guy who is not observant, and Shabbos morning he's just sitting in his house reading the newspaper, and because I invited him to my house, he's now going to go to my house, he's going to drive to my house, you have to wonder whether that's considered instigating someone to sin, because you're the one who brought the idea up. That's the ruling of Rav Shlomo Kluger. Just to summarize, the Gemara says it's only a problem of lifnei iver to cause someone to stumble, to cause someone to sin, if you're the facilitator, and without you he can't get the avera done. You're the doctor, and you have the prescription pad, and without you, there's no avera going to get done. But if he can get the avera without me, I told you, the cheeseburger's on the table, or let's say you feel that someone's not allowed to smoke, and he says, hey, could you pass me a cigarette? It's his pack of cigarettes, he can get it, but I just want to I want to push it off. I want to pass it to him, make it easier for him. So the Gemara says that's not lifnei iver, that's not a biblical prohibition of lifnei iver. But it's important to remember what Rav Shlomo Kluger says, and that is, it may not be biblically prohibited of lifnei iver if he can do it without you, but if you instigate it, you're the one who's pushing him. If you have this guy, this Jewish frum kid, and there's a cheeseburger on the table, and if he wants to get the cheeseburger, he can get the cheeseburger. And if he asks me to pass it and I do it, did I break a biblical prohibition of lifnei iver? Maybe not. But if I'm the one pushing it, I'm like, hey, you got to taste this cheeseburger. I'm telling you, it's fine. It's amazing. Then of course I'm over the biblical prohibition of lifnei iver. I'm the instigator, and that's going to be a problem. Okay. So, till now, we've pretty much found that the only biblical prohibition of lifnei iver is if you're on Trei Avar Dinara, you're on two opposite sides of the river. The person cannot do the sin without you. Okay. If he could do the sin without you, the Gemara doesn't tell us. The Gemara just seems to say it's mutter. Meaning, our case, you have a cheeseburger, it's on the table, the guy says, hey, can you pass me that cheeseburger? A Jewish guy says, can you pass me that cheeseburger? And he can get it without me by getting up. He's just a little lazy. If I pass it to him, the Gemara seems to say that it's absolutely permitted to pass it to him. Okay. And that is the opinion of many Rishonim, including the Mordechai. However, Taisvus in Shabbos Daf Gimel, the top Taisvus says the following. Even if the guy can do the aver without you, so it's not a problem of lifnei iver. There is a rabbinic prohibition. It's not biblical, but it's also derabanan. It's rabbinic. Because the Rabbanan felt that a person has to take care of another Jew. And if this Jewish guy says, could you pass me that cheeseburger? How could I pass it to him? Could he do it without me? Yes. So is it biblically prohibited to pass it to him? Maybe not. But the Rabbanan created a rabbinic prohibition, because the Rabbanan said, how could you pass it to him? How could you cause him to sin? Even though, yes, he could do it without you, but you're now a participant in the sin. You're not the facilitator, but you're a participant, and that's not allowed either. That's the opinion of Taisvis. The Rosh also writes that the Rosh on the Gemara says, Mikol Makom Isur D'Rabbanan Ika, there's still a rabbinic prohibition. Dafilu Katan Eichel Nevelis Bezdem Mitzum L'Hafrishai. Kol Shekin Gadol Shlo Yaseh Eloi. Says the Rosh, you're obligated to stop someone from sinning. That's one of your obligations. That person who said, I'm not God's policeman, I'm his salesman. It's not true, you are his policeman. The halacha is that you're supposed to stop someone from doing a sin, so how could you pass him a cheeseburger? I mentioned before, when it comes to passing someone a cigarette, you have to know, I'm not saying that it's not allowed. It may not be allowed. It may be passing him a cigarette is not allowed because it's considered for his health purposes. If you assume that you're not allowed to smoke because it's dangerous for your health, then passing it might be a problem. But the point is, now what the Rush tells us and what Taisus tell us is, if a guy's sitting at your table and he says, pass me that cheeseburger, and he could do it without me, he can get the Avera done without me. I'm not the facilitator, but I'm not allowed to pass it to him. And that's a rabbinic prohibition because you're not allowed to partake in a sin. That's not allowed. Okay, so how do we paskin? Do we paskin like this, Taisvis? So the Raman Yeridei Simin Kufnun Aleph Sif Aleph writes the following. He quotes both opinions. He says, Yesh Omrim, there are those that say, the prohibition of selling idolatry items to people. You're not allowed to sell a cross to someone because it's going to cause them to sin by serving idolatry. Says the Ramah, that's only true if they don't have a cross. Or they can't buy it in another store. I'm the only store that sells it. But if they can get it in another place, they want to buy this wine for their church. I'm not the only wine salesman. They can go to someone else. So that's what the Gemara says. If they can do the prohibition without me, it's permitted. I'm not the only facilitator. Don't get wine from me. Go to another store. You don't need me. I'm not the only guy. It's not like we're on two opposite sides of the river. So says the Ramah, Mutter, Limker Lahem Kol Davar. You're allowed to sell it to them. And that's the opinion of the Mordechai. V'yesh machmirim, but says the Ramah, there are those that prohibit it rabbinically. That's what we saw the Tosas' opinion. V'nogu lahaka kasar rishona, says the Ramah, many are lenient. V'chol ba'al nefesh yachmir la'atzmo, but everyone, someone who cares about religion should be machmir. That's what the Ramah says. And the Magen Avram in Arachayim Sivan Shin Mem Zayin Sifkat and Dal, it also writes that the psak is to be machmir. And therefore the basic understanding is that even if someone can do the sin without you, and you're not the facilitator of it, but you're not allowed to participate in it in any way. And that's a rabbinic prohibition, and the Svarim call that prohibition Misayeya. It's the Isser D'Rabbanan of Misayeya, because you're helping someone. You're not facilitating, that's Lifnei Iver. Lifnei Iver means you're facilitating. Without you, there is no sin. You're the only one who makes the sin happen. Over here, the sin can happen without you. You want to sell non-kosher food to a Jew, they can get it from another store. They can go to McDonald's, right? So you're not the only facilitator of it, but you're a Misayeya. You're helping him sin, and that's also rabbinically not allowed. This, by the way, is definitely part of the discussion when Rabbanan deal with, are you allowed to invite a guest for Shabbos when they're going to drive to your house? So like I said, even if they could drive without the invitation, so it may not be a facilitator, but you're definitely helping them sin. Definitely, you're a participant in the sin. So therefore, there's a rabbinic prohibition. Now, just to talk a little bit about this rabbinic prohibition, there's a famous sheet of the Shach. I don't want to go into it right now, but there's an interesting opinion of the Ksav Sofer. The Ksav Sofer addresses this rabbinic prohibition, again, not the biblical prohibition of Lifnei Iver, which is facilitating or instigating someone to sin. We're discussing now the rabbinic prohibition of Misayeya. The rabbinic prohibition of Misayeya, which is, even if they could sin without me, I'm not allowed to participate in the sin. Says the Ksav Sofer, that's only true if you're participating while the sin is happening. Meaning, I'll give you an example. You have a Nazir who's sitting at the table. He wants to drink some wine. He says, could you pass it to me? It's on the same table. Even without me, he can get up, right? He can get up and get the wine. I'm not allowed to pass it to him. That's rabbinically, because the second I pass him, he's going to drink. Boom, the Aver just happened. It's happening at the same time. When I pass it to him, he drinks, it's a problem. Says the Ksav Sofer, if by the time my actions are done, the Avera hasn't started yet, then it's not a problem. Why is this relevant? It's also the opinion of the Netziv in Shuvas Meshav Davar, Chilik Beis, and Lamed Aleph and Lamed Beis. This is very relevant for someone who wants to rent a business to someone who's, let's say you have a storefront, or let's say you have a house, and you're renting out your house, and two non-religious Jews want to rent out the house, and you know that they're going to be doing Averis in the house. They're not going to keep Shabbos in the house. They're going to be doing Averis in the house. So the question is it a problem? I'm facilitating, I'm participating in it, right? I'm giving them the house. Or let's say I'm renting them a storefront, and the storefront's going to be open on Shabbos. Am I allowed to do that? So right off the bat, when it comes to renting a house, I don't think you're facilitating. I don't think you'll be over Lifnei Iver, because they can get another house. They can rent a house from some other person. There's not, it's not like you're the only real estate agent in the city. So let's say, okay, so it's not Lifnei Iver. Is it Misayeya? What about the fact that there's a rabbinic prohibition of being any participant in a sin? And when I give them this house, I give them the keys, and then they do Averis in the house, I'm sort of participating. Says the Ksav Sofer, yeah, but by the time your actions are done, you're already removed. You give them the keys, and then 2 weeks later an Aver is done. Because there's such a distance, it's not like passing him a cup of wine where then he drinks it. It's happening momentarily. Over here, I give him the keys, and then what? 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, a week and a half, whatever it is, many days pass, because when it comes to the rabbinic prohibition of Misayeya, which is participating in a sin that a person can do without you, if you're removed before the Avera is done, it's allowed. That's what the Ksav Sofer says. The Marsham in Chelik Beis and in Kuf Bei Dalet also adds that when it comes to the rabbinic prohibition of Misayeya, it's only a problem if you actually hand them the item that the Avera is going to be done with. Meaning, I'm handing him a cup of wine, and he's going to drink this cup of wine. That's when it's a problem. But when it comes to renting someone a house, they're not doing an Avera with the walls. I'm not giving them the item that they'll sin with. Let's say they'll sin by turning on the television. I didn't give them that TV. So because I didn't actually give them the item, there's no rabbinic prohibition of Misayeya. This might be helpful again for driving, inviting someone for driving. If you believe that it's only a problem Misayeya, by inviting them, I didn't give them the car, and my actions are removed before the Aver is done. So according to the Ksav Sofer and the Marsham, it might be allowed. Okay. The next major aspect that I want to talk about, it will take some time to understand this. I understand it's been a little complicated till now, and that is the opinion of Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach about Lifnei Iver entirely. A lot of svarim that deal with the prohibition of Lifnei Iver, they all write that Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach had a very revolutionary way of perceiving this prohibition. Well, let me explain. Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in Shuvas Mincha Shloimeh Siman Lamed Hey was asked the following question. You have someone who's going to be a guest at your home. He's a dignitary. He's not religious, but he gives a lot of charity to yeshivas. He cares about Jewish people. He's not bitter about the Jewish people, and he has pretty much only good experiences. He's just not observant yet. The question is, are you allowed to give him food? What's the reason either way? We know that there's a concept you're not allowed because of Lifnei Iver prohibitions. It's a problem of Lifnei Iver to give him food. He's not going to make a bracha. I'm handing him the food. I'm giving him food for free, and he's going to eat it without making a bracha. That's Lifnei Iver. And by the way, that's real Lifnei Iver according to many poskim, the Manchas Chaim, because it's not like he can get the Aver without. He can't do the Aver without me. You can't just get free food anywhere. I'm the only one offering free food. So pretty much, it's a problem with neighbor. I'm giving him bread. He's not going to wash. He's not going to make a bracha. He's not going to bench. That's going to be a problem with neighbor. So therefore, you'll say you're not allowed to give him food. On the other hand, they mentioned to Rosh Shlomo Zalman, what about the fact that if I don't give him food, it's disrespectful. He comes over to my house for the whole afternoon, and we don't eat lunch because he's going to know that the reason why we're not eating lunch is because he's not observant, and it's going to cause him to hate religion. That's the question. Meaning, in other words, is it okay to cause him to sin? Is it okay for me to cause him to stumble if the alternative is seemingly worse? Meaning I have two choices in front of me. Those are the only choices I have. I can cause him to sin by eating bread without a bracha, or I can, by giving him bread, I'll cause him to sin, but it will prevent him from hating Judaism, or I could prevent him from eating bread without a bracha, but I'll cause him to sin much worse. I'll cause him to hate Judaism. Meaning, is it okay to cause him to stumble by eating bread without a bracha if that will prevent him from doing something even worse down the line by hating Judaism? That's the question. He says the following. Chashvani. By the way, I want to make this clear before Rosh Shlomo Zalman, before I go into the answer. Rosh Shlomo Zalman doesn't give a definitive answer at the end. He's unsure at the end. He writes Tzarachin. You still need to ask a Rav, but he just theorizes a very interesting line of reasoning. He says the following. Chashvani. I think. It is absolutely permissible to give this man bread and drink, and don't worry about the prohibition of lifnei iver. Why? Even though you're not supposed to tell someone to do any form of sin, even if it prevents them from doing a large sin. However, in our case, because over here we're dealing with the prohibition of lifnei iver, and if you don't give this man food, if you don't give him bread, you're trying to prevent him from eating without a bracha. If you don't give him food, he will eventually do a much worse avera by hating religion, and then he'll have no chance of becoming observant. Therefore, there's no avera in this case. There's no avera of lifnei iver. Why? The prohibition of lifnei iver means causing someone to stumble. In this case, you're not causing him to stumble. Over here, you're not causing him to stumble. On the contrary, you're saving him, by giving him bread, and he's going to eat it without a bracha. By causing him to commit this small sin, you're not causing him to stumble at all. You're actually saving him from committing a worse avera. Let me explain. Let me just explain what Rosh Shlomo Zalman is saying and why it's such a tremendous chiddush. What Rosh Shlomo Zalman is saying is the prohibition of lifnei iver in his mind is very simple. What is the prohibition of lifnei iver that we've been discussing till now? The Torah says, "Lifnei iver lo sitin michshol." You shall not cause your friend to stumble. And what the Gemara tells us is that you're not allowed to cause another Jew to sin. Okay, why not? So Rosh Shlomo Zalman is saying is because the Torah is, in other words, lifnei iver means, in the eyes of the Torah, what it means is take care of of another Jew's spiritual well-being. Make sure that they're as religious as they can. That's what the prohibition of lifnei iver really means. When it says don't cause someone to do an avera, what it means is make sure they're as religious and observant as they can be. The reason why you're not allowed to cause them to sin is because that's not looking out for their overall spiritual well-being. It's not good for their neshama for them to sin. And lifnei iver lo sitin michshol, it means take care of another Jew. That's like if you were to translate according to Hashem, lifnei iver lo sitin michshol, it means take care of another Jew. And don't cause them to sin, because that's not taking care of them. That's not helping them. That's not looking out for them. The Gemara says, in addition to this aspect of lifnei iver also means not to give someone a bad business deal, because it's all the same thing. It means look out for another Jew. and therefore you're not allowed to cause him to sin. You're not allowed to give wine to a nazir because it's not good for a nazir to drink wine. It's like passing poison to a little kid. You would never do that because it's not good for them. Says Rosh Zalman, though, there are times, albeit rare, but there are times where causing that person to sin is actually good for them in the long run. How is that? When the alternative is worse. Meaning Rosh Zalman said you have this case, right? This case is a funny case. You have two choices in front of you, and both of them are not good choices. One, you give the guy bread and he eats without making a bracha, which is a level, let's say it's a level B sin. I'm not trying to equate levels, but it's a sin. It's considered a smaller sin, but it's a sin. By doing that, though, you're preventing him from going off the derech, which is a much worse sin. And you're preventing him, by doing this, you're preventing him from hating Judaism. And maybe if you give him this bread, he'll actually enjoy your interaction and maybe he'll become observant. So by giving him this bread and him eating the bread, you're not causing him to stumble at all. You're saving him from the alternative. You're actually helping this person. Lifnei Iver Lo Sitin Mishal means do not make sure that another Jew is taken care of spiritually. There are times, albeit rare, where causing them to sin, if it means saving them from doing a much larger avera, that might be okay. Because in that instance, causing them to do that small sin is not causing them to stumble at all. Because in that instance, doing that small sin is better for them in the long run. That's the opinion of Rosh Zalman. Again, Rosh Zalman at the end, it's unclear exactly how he paskins, but that's the theory. So a lot of Rabbanim I've actually seen. By the way, the Chazon Ish wasn't really nachas to this chiluk of Rosh Zalman, but he was only okay if it's a suffix whether they'll sin, not if they'll certainly sin. But a lot of Rabbanim take this reasoning of Rosh Zalman Auerbach and try to allow one to invite guests for Shabbos even though they're going to drive, because they say, think about it. If you don't invite them, then they're just going to stay non-observant. If you invite them for Shabbos, yeah, they're going to drive for 20 minutes. They're going to be doing 20 minutes of sinning. But then the rest of Shabbos, they'll be keeping Shabbos by your house. And maybe it'll help them become observant. So by doing those 20 minutes of sinning, it's not a stumble at all. Because really, in the long run, it's better for them. And Lifnei Iver Lo Sitin Mishal doesn't just mean don't cause someone to do an avera. It means look out for someone's spiritual well-being. And this might be a rare instance where allowing them to do a small avera, telling them to drive to your house, if it prevents them. Let's say it's Pesach, right? And they only eat chametz. So maybe one can argue that by telling them to come to your house, and yes, it means that they drive for 20 minutes, but then the rest of Pesach they get to eat matzah and not chametz. So maybe it's better for them to do that small sin. Maybe that's not considering causing them to stumble. Maybe that's actually helping them. That's the tremendous chiddush that Rosh Zalman created. You should know Rosh Zalman already points that Rav Akiva Eiger already introduced such a concept. Let me explain what Rav Akiva Eiger says. The Torah says that a man is not allowed to shave off his payas. So, I'm not getting into the details of exactly how that is, but you're not allowed to take a blade and shave off your payas. The Gemara also tells us that there's a prohibition both for the one who's doing the cutting of the hair, the barber, and for the person whose hair is being cut. Meaning it's a problem for the barber to to shave off the guy's payas, and it's a problem for the Jew to have his payas shaved off. And if a Jew were to shave off his own payas, he would be doing two prohibitions. One is doing the cutting, and one is getting his hair cut. Okay. There's also another halacha that the Shulchan Aruch tells us in Yerdei Simin Kuf Pei Aleph Sivav that a woman is allowed to shave off her own payas, meaning a woman could shave her head. Many Chassidim do. Many Chassidish women do shave their head. A woman is allowed to shave off her head. However, she's not allowed to shave a man's head. She's not allowed to be the barber. Why not? Because she's causing that person to sin, right? That person is doing an avera when his hair is being cut. By her cutting his hair, she's causing him to sin. Very simple. That's called Lifnei Iver. Says Rav Akiva Eiger, what happens if a person, let's say a woman is there, and she knows that this guy is going to shave off his own payas. He's going to do it 100,000,000%, no question. And by doing that, he'll be doing two prohibitions, two biblical prohibitions. One is doing the hair cutting, and one is getting his hair cut. Is it okay for her to cut his hair? Meaning, she's doing the Avera of Lifnei Iver, she's causing him to stumble, but her intention is to minimize his sin, to go from 2 Averas to 1. If he cuts his own hair, he does 2 Averas. If he gets his hair cut, he gets 1 Avera. So a woman is not allowed to cut a man's hair because it's Lifnei Iver, it's causing him to stumble, but in this case, if she doesn't do it, he's going to be doing 2 Averas. And now, by her doing it, she's actually preventing him from doing a bigger Avera. She's getting it down from 2 to 1. So maybe it's allowed, says Rav Akiva Eiger. Because again, how could you say that she's causing him to stumble by cutting his head, by cutting his hair? How could you say she's causing him to stumble when she's actually preventing him from doing 2 Averas? She's telling him to only do 1 as opposed to doing 2. So how could you say that she's causing him to stumble? Perhaps that's what Lifnei Iver means. Lifnei Iver means looking out for the spiritual well-being of your friend. That's the opinion of Rav Akiva Eiger and potentially Rav Shlomo Zalman. Now, by the way, Rav Akiva Eiger was only discussing the rabbinic prohibition of Misayeh. He was not discussing Lifnei Iver, but Rav Shlomo Zalman seems to not make a distinction. Now, it is my opinion, I've spoken to people, I think this is pretty clear. I think there is very strong room to disagree with Rav Shlomo Zalman. This whole chiddush, this whole chiddush, what was Rav Shlomo Zalman's chiddush? Just to review, Rav Shlomo Zalman's chiddush was that sometimes you're allowed to cause someone to stumble, to cause someone to sin, if that will prevent him from doing a much larger Avera. If it's okay to give him food if that will prevent him from doing a much larger Avera, because Lifnei Iver doesn't just mean don't cause him to do an Avera, it means look out for his spiritual well-being. So if sometimes making him do a small Avera to prevent him from doing a large Avera, that might be allowed. I think there's very much a large room to disagree with that, based on the understanding of some Achronim. And that is like this. I mentioned before, what's the basic understanding of Lifnei Iver Lo Sita and Mechshel? What does that Avera mean? Rav Shlomo Zalman understood that what that Avera means is don't cause him to sin because you're supposed to be looking out for him. It's, as we would say, it's an Avera bein Adam lechavero. If I were to take categories and I would say, what are sins that have been Adam lechavero, from man to man, and what are sins that have been Adam l'makom, man to God, we would put Lifnei Iver in bein Adam lechavero. Bein Adam lechavero meaning that I have to give tzedakah, I have to love my other Jewish friends, and I'm also not allowed to cause him to sin, because causing him to sin is not good for his spiritual well-being. So says Rav Shlomo Zalman, if that's the case, if the whole Lifnei Iver, the whole reason why I can't cause someone to stumble and cause someone to sin is because I'm supposed to be looking out for them, in this case I am looking out for him. Because having this person do this small Aveira, let's say driving to my house, if that'll mean that he'll be religious for the rest of his life, of course that's the better investment for him in the future. So I am looking out for him. You can't say I'm not looking out for him. I am looking out for him. Rav Moshe Feinstein, though, and Rav Elchanan Wasserman and Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski Zatzal all have a slightly different understanding of the prohibition of Lifnei Iver. And I think this understanding of Lifnei Iver really throws a wrench in the whole opinion of Rav Shlomo Zalman. They say that Lifnei Iver is not only a sin bein Adam l'chavero, it's not just a sin between man and man, it's also a sin between man and God. What does that mean? It means that they understand Lifnei Iver is not just, what's understanding Lifnei Iver? The basic understanding of Lifnei Iver, as I said before, from Rav Shlomo Zalman, it means look out for another Jew. Don't cause him to sin because you got to be looking out for him. So these Achronim understand that it's not as simple as that. It's much deeper. Lifnei Iver means, when Hashem said it's a sin between man and God, it's not between man and man, it's a sin between man and God. What does it mean? It means, when I cause another Jew to, let's say, break Shabbos, according to Rav Shlomo Zalman, what I've done is, I wasn't nice to him. I wasn't nice to this other Jew. I caused him to sin. I wasn't looking out for this other Jew. That's not good because I should have been looking out for him. According to Ramosha and Rav Chaim Ozer and Rav Elchanan, it's much more than that. It's not just that I wasn't looking out for this Jew. I've sinned against God. Hashem's unhappy with my actions. Why? Because when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I don't want someone, let's say, to eat pork. I hate eating chazer. I hate eating pork so much that I don't want you to do it. It bothers me so much, I don't want you to do it. What Hashem meant is, I hate that sin so much, I don't want you to be eating the pork, and I don't want you to facilitate someone else eating the pork. When you cause someone else to stumble, the issue that you've done, the prohibition that you've done is not just you weren't nice to another Jew. Hashem's unhappy now because Hashem says, why are you so okay with facilitating a sin? Meaning that when Hashem says, I don't want someone to eat milk and meat together, I don't want someone to eat cheeseburgers, if I cause someone else to eat a cheeseburger and I give that guy a cheeseburger, I sell him a cheeseburger and I cause him to sin, it's not only that I've caused him to sin and I've messed up that guy, Hashem's unhappy with me because Hashem says, Avi, I thought I hate cheeseburgers, and if you hate cheeseburgers the way I hate cheeseburgers, says Hashem, you wouldn't even help someone else do it. Meaning, according to these poskim, when you cause someone to sin, lifnei iver, you are also punished for that sin. When I cause someone to break Shabbos, it goes down in my record as if I broke Shabbos in a way. Because I facilitated, because I had a part of it. When the Torah says don't break Shabbos, what Hashem meant, according to this, not Rav Shlomo Zalman, according to Ramosha, what it meant is Hashem was saying don't break Shabbos, and don't even be a facilitator of breaking Shabbos. Because a Jew can't even come close to such a thing. And if you do, and if you cause someone to sin, and you cause someone to break Shabbos, then it goes down in the record as if you broke Shabbos. It's not just a sin between man and man, it's a sin between man and God. It's not just that when you push someone over and they do an Aveira, you messed him up. But you're scot clean, but you just messed him up. No, it's more than that. It's you. Hashem is unhappy with you because Hashem says, clearly you're okay with breaking Shabbos because you facilitate others. So you get punished as if you broke Shabbos. Some Rishonim already mentioned such an idea. The Rishonim say, we know that there are 3 Averis that a person has to give up his life for. And that's idolatry, murder, and sexual relations. If someone comes over and says, bow down to an idol, or I'll kill you, a Jew has to die. The question is, what if a guy comes with a gun to your head and he says, you have to facilitate someone else to bow down to an idol? Meaning you have to do lifnei iver of idolatry, or I'll kill you. So it depends. Meaning, again, understand the case. The case is, someone comes with a gun to your head and says, you have to make sure Chaim next door bows down in church, or I'll kill you. So do you have to give up your life? So it'll depend on what we just said. According to Rav Shlomo Zalman, according to that understanding that lifnei iver is a sin between man and man, it goes in the category, it's like not doing chesed. Causing another Jew to do idolatry, it's a mean thing to do, and it's an avera because you're causing another Jew to stumble. But it's a sin between man and man. It's not as if I cause someone else to do idolatry, it's as if I did it. No, of course it's not as if I did idolatry. It's as if I was a jerk. And Hashem says, don't be a jerk. That's lifnei iver. Don't be a jerk. So I don't have to give up my life. I'm not allowed to give up my life. But other Rishonim, the Balma'ar and other Rishonim say, no, you have to give up your life. Even if it's facilitating someone else to do avodah zarah. The Balma'ar in Perek Ben Sorah Mor Daf Yud Ches V'Daf Arif says that there's an obligation to give up your life, even if you're just facilitating someone to do idolatry. What's the understanding of that? The answer is that's how we understood lifnei iver. Lifnei iver doesn't just mean don't be a jerk. It's a sin between man and God. Hashem says don't do idolatry. And if you facilitate someone else of doing idolatry, Hashem says, you know what? It's as if you did it. Because if you're so okay with doing this sin, when I said don't do idolatry, I meant don't do it, and don't even cause someone else to do it. But if you cause someone else to do it, it's as if you did the sin of idolatry. This might be a little complicated, and I hope I explained to the best of my abilities. But if you understand it that way, Go back to, let's say you want to invite someone to your house for Shabbos and they're going to drive to your house. So many Rabbanan say, if by having them come to your house they'll become more religious and they become more observant, it's okay. Why? Rosh Hashanah Zalman Orba said it's okay. What does that mean? Because if you understand, because they said, you're not allowed to cause someone to sin, because meaning you have to look out for their spiritual well-being. It's a sin, when the Torah says lifnei iver, it means look out for your another Jew's spiritual well-being. And therefore, in this case, causing him to drive on Shabbos, which is a sin, is okay, because in the long run, it'll help him become religious. So in the long run, it's good for him. You're not causing him to stumble. On the contrary, you're looking out for him. But according to this understanding of Rav Moshe and the Baal Ma'ar, the prohibition of lifnei iver is not just look out for your friend. It's not between you and your friend. Who cares about your friend? It's not about him. It's about you and God. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, don't break Shabbos, and don't even cause someone to break Shabbos. Therefore, who cares that it might be in his overall well-being? Who cares? It's a personal sin. It's Avi Zakatinsky is not allowed to break Shabbos, and Avi Zakatinsky is not allowed to even cause someone to break Shabbos. Who cares if doing so, I go to Hashem, right, and I tell him, let's try to think this out. I go to Hashem, and Hashem says, you broke Shabbos. Let's say I broke Shabbos. I turn the lights on Shabbos. And Hashem says, why'd you do that? I said, well, it was really good for my friend. He was going through something, and for his overall well-being, it was better that I turn on the light. Is there such a heter? Of course not. Who cares what your friend's going through? When it comes to mitzvahs, there's a lot of, you got to look out for yourself. You can't turn on the light on Shabbos because it's better for your friend. Unless he's sick, he's dying. If he's not dying, just it's better for him in the long run. How could you do that? So the same way I can't break Shabbos, I'm not even allowed to facilitate breaking Shabbos. Facilitating breaking Shabbos, according to Rav Moshe, it's a sin between man and God. It's not about the other person. It's when Hashem said don't break Shabbos, he meant don't break Shabbos and don't cause someone else to break Shabbos. And the same way I'm not allowed to break Shabbos in order to help my friend in the long run, I'm not allowed to facilitate, I'm not allowed to break Shabbos through lifnei iver in order to help my friend in the long run. You're not allowed to do that. So according to that understanding, if you understand that lifnei iver is a sin between man and God, not between man and man, it makes no difference about your friend. If it's between man and God, it's you and God alone. There's no one else there. If it's between you and man, then you can take your friend's overall well-being into play. But if it's a sin between you and God, then it's just going to be between you and God after 120 years. And the fact that your friend needed this for his overall being is irrelevant. I think there's room to disagree with that opinion of Rav Shlomo Zalman. Just to end off, I want to end off with one more halacha, and that's from Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein in Orach Chaim Siman Sadi Tes adds that causing someone to sin many times could be the problem of mesis. Mesis means someone pushing someone off the derech. There's such a prohibition. It's like akin to bringing someone into church, bring another Jew into a church. Chas v'shalom. It's worse than just causing someone to sin. It's as they say, it's called mesis. It means pushing someone off the derech. Pushing someone off the derech is also prohibited. Rav Moshe Feinstein felt that prohibition applies to things other than idolatry. Again, there's room for it. I can't go into it right now, but I just to summarize all the concepts that we've seen till now. The Torah says, "Lifnei iver l'sitin mechshel." You're not allowed to cause another Jew to stumble. You're not allowed to cause another Jew to do a sin. The Gemara tells us that that's only true if you're the facilitator. You're on two opposite sides of the river, and he cannot do the sin without you. But if he could do the sin without you, you're just making it easier for him. It's not a problem of lifnei iver. We saw that Rosh McCluger says, although if he could do the sin without you, it's not a problem lifnei iver, but if you're the instigator, if you're pushing him to do the sin, he wasn't going to sin, meaning he didn't have the idea to sin, and you're pushing him, then it is a problem lifnei iver. Even if he could do the sin without you, you're not the facilitator of the sin. He could do the Avera without you. The cheeseburger is on the same table. He just asks you to pass it to him. It may not be biblically prohibited, but the Ramah, the Taisvis, Magen Avram, they all say there is a rabbinic prohibition called misayeya. That means on a rabbinic level, you're not allowed to be a participant in a sin in any way. The Ksav Sofer and Marsham both tell us that it's only a problem of misayeya. Misayeya is only an issue. Being a participant is only an issue if you're doing an Avera at the same time. If your actions are at the same time as the sin, by passing him the cheeseburger, he eats the cheeseburger right now, that's when it's a problem. But if I rent a house to someone and then 2 weeks later he does a sin in the house, by the time my actions are over, by the time I'm removed, The sin hasn't started yet. It's not a problem of misayeya. It's not a rabbinic prohibition. In addition, there's no rabbinic prohibition if you don't actually hand him the object that the sin will be taking place with. You hand him wine, he'll actually do sin with the wine itself. That's when it's a rabbinic prohibition. But if you rent out a house and he does a sin inside the house, that's not going to be a problem of misayeya. Then we have Rav Shlomo Zalman's big chiddush that when it comes to the prohibition of lifnei iver, when it comes to the overall prohibition of causing someone to stumble, you're allowed to take into account his overall well-being. Meaning, if causing him to sin is good for him in the long run, then maybe it's allowed, because you could be it's hard to say that you're causing him to sin when you're actually looking out for him. But again, obviously it's only good for him, not for his mental health. It means for his spiritual level. Sometimes causing him to do a small sin is good for him on a spiritual level in the long run. Again, each case you have to be brought to a Rav because it's very complex and you're dealing with a lot of fire. But maybe there'll be room to be lenient. However, according to Rav Moshe's understanding and Rav Chaim Moses' understanding, Rav Elchana's understanding, that if you understand lifnei iver as a sin between man and God, not between man and man, then it's you and Hashem. Meaning, and when the Torah says lifnei iver, it means don't do a sin, and the same way I don't want you to break Shabbos, I don't even want you to be a participant in breaking Shabbos, a facilitator in breaking Shabbos, and it's a sin between man and God. It has nothing to do with the other person. Therefore, even if it's good for his spiritual well-being in the long run, it makes no difference. Okay, if there are any questions, they could be sent to avizakatinsky@gmail.com, avizakutinsky@gmail.com. Again, these are very complex concepts. I hope Hashem and I hope there'll be no mistakes from this year, no complications. If there are any questions, please, I urge you to every question to send them my way through an email, and that way all issues can be avoided. Thank you very much.